My parents told me they'd give me a dime for every book I read, and I had a comic book addiction. So one summer I read 100 books in one summer reading competition. I started reading in first grade, and that led me to a love of science fiction and fantasy, especially science fiction. And I read the big three, Heinlein, Clarke, and Asimov. And my entire generation, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, a lot of us were influenced by that. So
I was reading 10 a week when I was, in grade 3 and 4. My neighbor across the street had a wall of science fiction. And he let me come in once a week and take, as many books as I wanted. And this time I was reading exactly the same crew that you described. I liked Ray Bradbury too.
A famous book by Heinlein is Have Spacesuit Will Travel. And in the book, precocious youth builds a spaceship, gets picked up by, bug-eyed monsters or by space aliens, gallivants around the universe, saves the human race from bug-eyed monsters, comes back, and because he saved the human race through his courage and his capability, he gets full tuition scholarship to MIT. Well, I read that, I guess, by 6th grade, and I just thought I was going to MIT. So I liked, and then my area, we used to play Dungeons and Dragons. We used to do board games. We play all these simulation games, and when you play these games, they give you a 64-page set of rules and a set of dice, and you're creating a simulation of a naval battle or an army battle or whatever it might be. That was just before computers got big. So I got very interested in all that. That drove me down a path where I went to MIT. I studied spaceship engineering, astronautics really. And while I was there, I studying astronautical engineering, I stumbled across another course at the School of Management there called System Dynamics, and I became fascinated with that. It was the computer simulation of human behavior. So people were building...
Who were the big names in system dynamics?
Jay Forrester founded the school, and the idea was build a computer simulation that shows what happens if you change the dynamics of a traffic system in a city. I mean, the classic example is I build a beltway around the city, and I build a hub and spoke system, and I build superhighways because I want to speed up travel time. But invariably what happens is the city increases by a factor of 10 and the travel times go back to what they were. Because of the feedback, right? If you built the roads and then no one reacted to it, then you would be able to get around faster.
Yes, but and the world would be a much simpler place.
Another classic example is, you remember the Club of Rome study, they declared that the world was going to run out of resources within 10 years. And they declared it because all the oil reserves were for 10 more years. But if you thought about it, you would realize that an oil company only has an incentive to identify 10 years worth of reserves, and everything after that's a diminishing return. So we always have 10 years worth of reserves. And so
it's a time horizon issue, not a resource issue.
If you see the world as a dynamic, nonlinear feedback system, and you consider the human behavior or the reaction to what you do, then you're much more sophisticated, and you start to realize the simplistic linear models don't work. And you have to consider human behavior and economics and urban planning and business planning. And so I studied that. I did my thesis in it. I started building computer simulations. I learned from the computer scientist in the School of Management. I got very fascinated in the school. I got very interested in politics, philosophy, economics. I ended up taking another degree in the history of science. And, as I studied...
Where did you take that?
At MIT.
It was at MIT too.
So at the same time.
When were you there?
1983 to 1987. And when I was there, I was also an Air Force cadet. The Air Force paid for my education to go through MIT. I was very fortunate in that regard. So this is all just backstory, but I had the background as a cadet and a commissioned officer in the Air Force. I grew up on Air Force bases my entire life. My father was career non-commissioned officer, so I lived on military bases.
Move a lot?
Moved a lot. So I saw the world. I had the science fiction background. I had the Dungeons and Dragons, the fantasy background. I got very interested in the history of science. That's all about paradigm shift. how do people embrace new ideas, whether it's the Copernican revolution or whether it's relativity and Einstein's ideas, or whether it's quantum physics, or whether it's what happens when I introduce railroads or electricity or crude oil or radio. How does it change the culture? How does it change the politics? How does it change the economics of the civilization? So that was my academic background. So I always was fascinated by science and technology. I was surrounded by technologists at MIT. I got into the space, but the fantasy background was very important because in fantasy,